everyone on the panel from all sides, even the ones saying it is, are under threat of being killed. It can't be. I mean, if we were discussing Quakers, it would probably be easier. The fact is that you learn very swiftly in this game. A little intimidation goes a really long way. And just as we have never had a novel like the Satanic Verses again, whenever anyone does start to try, it's now subdued even further. And Charlie Hebdo is such a crucial case for this reason, because what our societies are doing is bit by bit believing that they can move toward Islam's view of itself. See, I've always taken the view that there is really no danger to our societies from repeated suicide bombings. You know, you do not have to explain to New Yorkers why people shouldn't fly planes into towers. You do not have to explain to Londoners why people shouldn't blow up the tubes and buses. They really don't like it already. That one's easy. But the far more difficult case is to say that when somebody does do that, and they are here, and they are making a constant, intransigent case, do not think you can move even an inch nearer them and still be yourself. But that's what's happened. It's such a tendency in our societies. In Britain, they always say the truth lies in the middle. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. The truth between Sharia and our law is not in the middle. It's not in a bit of Sharia. If one person comes toward you saying in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, an archangel landed and said all this stuff that was uncannily similar to the Old and New Testament, and this was the word of God, if that's their claim, which if they want to believe that's fine by me, but if they start to try to make me believe that, or to try to make my society, instead of saying, well, if that's your belief, very well, but that's not our belief, we don't reckon it happened like that, and we reckon Muhammad made the whole thing up, and so on, then there is no middle ground between those two positions. We can't, as it were, compromise that some of it was dictated by an archangel. Every other Tuesday. You can't pretend that, as it were, I mean, the terrible, really pissy thing that politicians do is that one where they quote bits of the Quran where it's clear that they haven't read it, or clear that they just don't want to. And then they say things like, but the Quran says, I mean, there is no compulsion in religion. And you go, so what if it does? I mean, it could say all sorts of things, but are you going to concede that it's true because of that? They have got a version of Islam which they wish to be true, and they have fatally mistaken what has been hitherto quite a good thing that we've had in Europe, which is a difference between things you wish to be true and the things that are in front of you. And therein lies our problem.
Thank you. One final question.
Thank you very much for your excellent sense of humor.
Thank you.
I was in a debate recently, and I defended the British Defence League. And I did that on the basis of a program on Danish television where the leader or whatever, he talked about the organization, and I got a pretty good impression of him. But now I realize on the basis of what you just said that I shouldn't support the British Defence League. Is that correct?
This is a very important question. I have had quite a tortured track record on this one for the following reason, which is that I've said for a long time that one of my great fears in Europe generally, but in my country in particular, would be that in the end, decent ordinary people, if the mainstream politicians didn't finally address these questions, decent ordinary people would find themselves stuck between Islamic fascists and other fascists. fighting it out between themselves. Now, I say that as a general point. However, on the question of the English Defence League, this is a very, very complex one. And I'm not making a definitive point on this, although every time I say that about the English Defence League, some far leftist or Islamist organisation says that I'm saying something supportive of them. So, when they first started, I was doing an interview in East London, and they found out I was there, and they came and tried to speak to me. And I said at that time they were all sort of what I would describe as skin-headed types of a kind that the British National Party, that is a racist, fascist party. The British National Party, they looked of that type, and we didn't really know anything about the English Defence League at the time. But I said to them, I don't want to see you, go away. And I said I have to admit in slightly stronger language. And they said, we're not the British National Party. And I said, well, look, I spend a lot of my life criticising politicians who say, but, Mr. Qaradawi came in, he seemed nice and so on, and he promised he wasn't an Islamic fundamentalist, and I say, I could spend a lot of my time criticising politicians for being naive on that one, so I'm afraid if you just say to me, you're not, I just don't know, I don't know who you are, what you are. But as I wrote it somewhere at the time, one of them said to me, we understand, we'll leave you alone, we just want to say we're just British working class guys who hate the fact that we're losing our country. And if you're a member of, I don't like thinking of it, but myself, I'm pretty, I'm privileged in the position I'm in. I'm not a working class, unemployed guy. I have a job. I have a voice in the media and so on. When somebody says that to you, I can tell you it's a pretty wrenching thing. And it is a question that a lot of us have asked. What do we expect people to do? Those of us who have a voice in the media and who make arguments and politicians and so on, what do we expect people to do on the ground? Now, when they had their first demonstrations, they said things like, they had posters saying things like, Sharia persecutes women, and Sharia is against homosexuals and so on. I said, if those are the things you're going on, then that's great with me. That would be, if you were ever to have a grassroots movement opposed to these things, that would be the sort of thing you would hope they would do it on. But it's an extremely complex phenomenon, because there have been investigations which have shown that they have extremists and BNP types in their ranks, but they have also shown they have tried to get such people out, and you have to give them the benefit of the doubt on some of that. They have tried, and it isn't easy, and it's a nascent grassroots starting off young movement, and they're learning some of the mistakes as they go along. And then on the other hand, there are also many people, there's a study that's coming out on Monday from the think tank Demos, showing that actually a majority of their supporters online and so on certainly aren't of a sort of nativist, type. They just hate what's happening. So I come back to this point really with them, that this is what happens when the mainstream loses. When the mainstream abandons its job. This is what happens. I mean, I hate to quote it in almost, it's a cliche, but this, as Yeats said, is what happens when the centre does not hold. The best lack all conviction, and the rest are filled with passionate intensity. That's the problem, and I think it should be, to me, treated with nuance, treated with care, and I hate the people in the media who simply see a group of working class white guys and think, excellent, we can call them Nazis, when they would never go into a mosque and see a group of Muslims and say, you're all Islamists. I hate that. But it requires enormous care, and it's going to require enormous care in the years ahead. And as I say, if they don't get in charge, if they don't get on top of the extreme Islamists, if they don't get on top of that, the EDL, and far worse, will be the sort of thing we will see far more of in Europe. And it will be a Europe that I think very few of us would want to be in.
If I may make just one small observation before we go on to the very last question. You could say, and led into the accusation of the Free Press Society, that as their chairman they had a convicted criminal, named me, which goes to show that this is an extremist organization of a racist view. As a matter of fact, I did a speech a couple of months ago for the Radical Youth Group, that is the Social Liberal Party's youth organization in Denmark. And somebody said, wouldn't it be better if you shows that as a chairman, one is not tainted by racism. And so I said, well, you have a point. Why don't you join the organization and come and you can vote for some other people on the board? You see what I mean? I mean, if you start out condemning people for being extremists and then you use that against them.
Yeah.
You have to have some pretty good grounds on which to do that.
And the facts will continue to matter. And your guy was wrong on his facts. That's why he's wrong.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, final question.
Thanks a lot for doing such a beautiful job on counter-depression stuff today for us. It's wonderful. Once we had a boss from our Royal Theatre in our panel, and someone asked him, would you consider putting up Biedermann and the Arsonists at your theatre? And he said no, because he found it was a little outdated, it was not in sync with the presence, and no. And just a couple of months later, he put up My Fair Lady. So, apart from you, Mr. Bean, what is the situation among the artists and the actors and people like that in Great Britain today?
I would just sum it up very briefly by saying that it is what it is everywhere, which is that everyone is scared and they don't want to admit they're scared, because they all want to pat themselves on the back as being radical people who challenge society with difficult issues. So, for instance, Sir David Hare, just received the first Harold Pinter Award for theatre, saying he spent his career rowing against the tide, challenging all the mainstream ideas of bullshit. David Hare has spent his life writing mainstream left-wing agitprop theatre. His last play was about the way in which the bankers seem to have misled everyone on the economy. The one before that was about how Tony Blair seemed to have misled the people over the Iraq War. You see, again and again and again. And the point is, we have an elite of anti-elitists. We have an elite who pat themselves on the back for their grand countercultural abilities. They don't realize they are the culture. They are the culture. And they just love it. They love it. They award each other awards, and they all sit on the same panels for different awards that they give to that guy who was on the panel that gave them that award for their bravery in attacking George Bush. Or for standing up against Dick Cheney. And it must be awful for these people. You've got, in one way, you've got to feel sympathy for them. It must be awful for them. They have been told their whole lives that they're brave and they're cowards, the worst of the lot. And now the thing is, they must sense it. They must know it. And I wish them more and more torment